And while you're entering and getting settled in and getting your speakers working, I do have some books here to share with you. This is a guide that the AARP put together. It is free online. We also have it in print for free pickup in the library branches here at the Des Moines Public Library. AARP also sponsored our ADU Accessory Dwelling Unit programming. And so we did purchase some books at the library that you can request and get and check out. Thanks to AARP Iowa for those. I want to welcome everyone to our program today. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Elizabeth Hoover de Galvez. And if you have any trouble during this program, you can send a chat message to the hosts, and we will try and get that troubleshooted for you. We'll troubleshoot that for you. And I want to very quickly introduce all of our excellent panelists that are here today with us. So you'll get to meet all of them and hear more from them in just a moment, but very quickly, I want to introduce Brad Anderson from AARP Iowa. It's thanks to his organization that this program is possible. They also funded our gingerbread ADU program in December, if you participated in that. So that was a lot of fun last month. And so we did hear a question in the chat. We will record this and we'll send all participants who registered a recording of this, and as well as a feedback form later. So just if you're wondering about that, you'll get that email later if you registered. Next is Kris Saddoris from Hubble Realty, and also the president of the board of Home Inc., great local organization here. Jason Van Essen is a city planner, city of Des Moines, so we'll hear from him. And Katy Severe is here. She's a homeowner in Des Moines who has an ADU. So we're really excited. Please send your questions via chat throughout the program. We will pause to answer questions if they're pertinent to the current presentation, or we'll save them till the end, and we'll have time for questions at the end when we'll turn your mics and cameras back on. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Brad and have Brad kind of get started for us.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay. Give me a thumbs up, Elizabeth. Okay, good. First of all, I just want to thank the Des Moines Public Library. I mean, you guys are amazing. And that gingerbread competition, AARP did sponsor a gingerbread ADU competition, our first ever. And honestly, we had no idea how it was going to go. And I think safe to say the library didn't really expect as many entrants as they did. But I think we had around 150 entrants or something, and I voted for the Dr. Seuss ADU, gingerbread ADU, and it was just amazing. So it really did a lot, I think, to educate the people who were doing the gingerbread houses on exactly what an ADU is, but it also showed, I think, the city, and Jason can attest to this, that there's a lot of interest in ADUs, and so we were grateful for everyone that entered. I'm going to start a presentation, and let's see how ADU. See if this works. Okay, can everyone see that? We're good? Okay, and I know you're thinking, oh, well, here we go with another boring PowerPoint. This is not boring, though. This is amazing. So tune in, because you're going to see a lot of great examples of ADUs and get to really know more about them. I know we've had people on the call that I think Elizabeth was saying there are a couple people that are considering building an ADU. I think there are some even considering moving to Des Moines and want to know if they do move to Des Moines, is an ADU an option? Well, we're going to go through all that, and thankfully we've got Kris Saddoris and Jason Van Essen here to help us through this. So let's go to the. Here we go with the. Okay, so why does AARP even care about ADUs? Well, I like to start my presentations with some table setting when it comes to demographics, because we have to understand how dramatically the landscape is going to change really in the next couple decades. So by 2035, as Wall Street Journal reported, we're going to have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18. And it's really tough to, see that without seeing a graph, but I'm going to tell you, this is a sea change from what we've seen before. And our population is getting dramatically older. That's happening here in Iowa, of course. It's happening across the country. And some people refer to this as the silver tsunami. That is not a term that AARP likes because nothing good has happened from a tsunami. We believe that older Iowans have a lot to add in terms of economy. They have money to spend, they've got time, and they've got a tremendous amount of wisdom to help our communities. And so communities need to figure out how to embrace this aging demographic that is going to happen. And one of the ways that our communities need to think about this is our housing stock and how to make our housing as age-friendly as possible. And part of that equation is ADUs. And so here's a quick question that I have, which is, where do Americans want to live as they age? AARP takes a tremendous amount of surveys, and we ask this question many times. We do this in our caregiving surveys, which we do annually, and we have done for about 25 years now. Where do they want to live? Well, here's the answer. It's not more complicated than that. They want to live in their community. And most of the people that want to live in their community want to stay in their homes as long as possible. And so in our most recent survey, it showed that 77% of respondents wanted to remain in their community for as long as possible. This means it's not, these aren't people that want to move to Florida or Arizona, as much as that is appealing this time of year. It's, they don't want to live in nursing homes. They want to live in their community. And particularly if they can, they want to try and remain in their own home. So what is an ADU? And it should be known that in Des Moines, they're referred to as AHUs. So these are accessory dwelling units. And here's the definition, as I saw recently in a news clip from the Orlando Sentinel. But they're known as granny flats, which AARP doesn't love that term either, but in-law suites, guest houses. In Des Moines, they're called accessory household units, AHUs. So they're called a lot of different things, which has honestly led to some of the confusion around, can I build one of these or not? And so we're going to go through some of the zoning ordinance code issues that we've addressed here in Des Moines. But that's what an ADU is. So who can build one? Well, number one is empty nesters can build one, or should consider looking into building one. If they want to either rent out their main house or rent out the ADU. Families with kids can build one if they've got grandparents that they want to invite to maybe help take care of the kids or just keep the grandparents a little closer to home. Caregivers can live in an ADU. Those with disabilities can live independently. So if you've got someone that may have some disabilities, can live independently, but may need to be checked on every now and again or have some kind of support system, an ADU is a great option for someone with disabilities. And homeowners, of course, can use ADUs for supplemental income. And we'll get into what it means to rent an ADU and how you can go about doing that. And workers can use ADUs for an office or a workshop. And finally, college students, I'm going to be getting a couple of these here in the coming years, can live in ADUs when they come home and they don't want to live in their rooms or don't want to be anywhere near their parents. So those are options. Now, in our surveys, we did ask questions about ADUs, and a couple, these are the answers. I don't like PowerPoints with a bunch of words on it, so I want to highlight a couple things here. So one thing I noticed is caregiving seems to be, at least from our members, one of the biggest sources of interest when it comes to ADUs. And And I think that's especially true with the pandemic because we've kind of seen, what happened in our nursing homes early on, which was there was a tremendous amount of COVID, first of all, that went through nursing homes, but also isolation. And the nursing homes were on lockdown, and it was tough to even be able to hold hands with loved ones. And so I think given what we saw in the nursing homes over the past 2 years, that helped lead to interest in, well, maybe we should reconsider long-term care and really take a look at building an ADU for that reason. And I also want to say, if there are chats, Elizabeth, I think we talked about this, but if there are questions in the chat, feel free to ask and feel free to interrupt to the extent that you can. So these are some different types of ADUs, and the big point about ADUs is it has to have an independent kitchen and a bathroom. You have to be able to live in an ADU independently. So you can have one inside your home. You can have one in your basement. It just has to have a bathroom and a kitchen. So these are the various types of ADUs, and these are kind of actual photos of ADUs. There is the garage ADU. There's the downstairs ADU.
Hey, Brad, I'm going to
Yeah.
stop you for one question that came up. What's the difference between a tiny house and an ADU? Does a tiny house count as an ADU?
It can. And I don't know, Kris, what is your take on that? Because I've seen that it can be classified as an ADU. Is that your understanding as well?
It can be. Cities have a lot of requirements, and I know Jason's going to talk a lot about that. So depending on what's in the tiny home, it could be an ADU, but the city has some requirements that he'll go through. And I think assuming those requirements are met, then yeah, absolutely, it can be.
I think that if I could, the short answer is that a tiny home could be its own primary unit on a lot, where an accessory unit is always the secondary. So there's always the main living quarters, and then the accessory is the smaller secondary unit. So a tiny home could be accessory to a primary, or it could be its own thing on its own lot.
That's a
Thank
great
you.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the different types of ADUs, and we can talk about these more specifically down the road. But there are a lot of different uses for them, as we talked about. And if you're thinking, okay, well, what is one use that maybe I'm familiar with? Well, Fonzie had an ADU above the Cunningham's garage in Happy Days, and that's a picture of the ADU from the inside. And notice it has a kitchen, and we're assuming Fonzie had access to a bathroom and a shower. So that's what Fonzie's house probably looked like. That's not the actual Cunningham's house, but that's the kind of ADU that Fonzie had. And that's one of the garage ADUs. So when we initially thought about these, maybe about 5 years ago, I think that's the first one that came to mind was, okay, well, we have a garage. Let's put a home over the garage. Michael Siever from Growing Pains, by the way, also lived in a garage ADU. But so when I was thinking about one for my mother-in-law, for example, I was thinking, if there are any mobility issues, it may make sense to actually convert the garage itself into an ADU. Therefore, you have that first floor access into the home. So that's another way to think of, that's kind of an option B for garages. Now, you may ask yourself, can I live in a home this small? I love this slide. I think this is just so amazing because if you look at it, a lot of us just have way too much space, especially compared to 1950, where we had more people in our homes living in a smaller amount of space. And so we had about 1,000 square feet in 1950. And as you can see, we've got about 2,500 and fewer people living in these giant homes. And so the answer to, can I live comfortably in an ADU is yes, you can. So one city that really has embraced ADUs for a long time is Portland, Oregon. And I'm going to use them as just a quick example of when the city changes its ordinances, as we are doing here in Des Moines, and really embraces accessory dwelling units, what can happen. So as you can see, Portland, Oregon is pretty progressive when it comes to ADUs, but they did have some regulations, impact fees, design, compatibility, and size regulations that they had to address. And once they did, you can see the giant spike in the numbers of a number of people that really wanted to look into ADUs as an option. Now, one of the things that Portland also experienced during that same window, which is why they changed the regulations, are really dramatic housing affordability issues, which we're seeing in Des Moines. And we're not seeing them as much as they've seen them in Portland, or certainly in California, which now allows ADUs through statewide legislation because, it's just so expensive to build a home there. And then here's a little side-by-side, Des Moines versus Cedar Rapids, just to give you a sense of where we are in regulations and where Cedar Rapids is. Cedar Rapids is maybe arguably a little more user-friendly when it comes to ADUs. And I don't, it's tough to say if that's because of the size of the population or, why that is per se. But again, one of the things that we're doing here in Des Moines is trying to make it as easy as possible and expanding some of the permitting to allow more ADUs or AHUs as they're known here. A couple things to consider before turning it over to Kris. Property taxes. Your property taxes will likely increase because what you're doing is you're adding value to your home. So just understand that. Landlord, and Kris is probably best to talk about this, but are you ready to be one? Home Inc. Is a local nonprofit. They've been around for 50 years. They have tremendous resources on helping you if you're considering being a landlord. Zoning, here are the numbers to call, and I will tell you the city is very helpful when it comes to this, and you can really just give them a call and you'll talk to a live human being. So those are the numbers, and we can share that maybe in the chat if we want to as well. And fees, and this is something that Jason can maybe speak to a little bit, but sometimes there are fees, and so you're going to want to see when it comes to utility connections, for example, are there fees related to what I'm trying to do in my backyard? So with that, I will turn it over to Kris. Let me see. And Kris, one of the things that we're doing in Des Moines is we're building, of course, a model ADU, and that's one of the things that we have partnered with Home Inc. in your role as president of the board of directors of Home Inc. And so I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the project that we've been working on here in Des Moines over the last year.
I can. Thanks, Brad. I am here on behalf of Home Inc. We are a 50-year-old nonprofit organization. We develop, educate homeowners through trying to get through home ownership. We have a counseling service. We're a United Way agency. And so this is a very unique partnership. We have very much enjoyed the opportunity to work with AARP. For folks that don't know, they are a national leader in ADU development and education, which to me is phenomenal. I happened to stumble on them at a housing conference about 3 years ago, came back and called Brad and said, hey, we need to do this in Des Moines. How do we do it? Unfortunately, I was on the Home Inc. board, and so I went to Pam Carmichael, who was ED at that point, and said, hey, how do we build one? Because in fairness, we're not Missouri, but in Des Moines, we like to touch and feel. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And I said, we got to build one of these. How do we do it? And I went back to Brad, who fortunately AARP has what they call a challenge grant, which is really a way for them to get things started in a lot of communities. And we were fortunate enough to be awarded one. And we were off to the races. And so, long story short, this project is under construction right now up in the Highland Park, Oak Park neighborhood. We were fortunate to get into the ground before it got really cold. This will deliver next spring. But we partnered up with a lot of organizations, and that was what we do beautifully in Des Moines. Invest DSM is the local reinvestment group. It's a partnership between the city of Des Moines and Polk County. And so we knew we wanted to partner with them, and they're working in 4 neighborhoods, one of which is this Oak Park, Highland Park area. And we literally went to them and said, here's what we want to do. How can you help us? And they were great. They found a lot. for us, but it had a home that they wanted to tear down, and they said, hey, we know you guys do homes beautifully. Can you do both? And so what you see on the screen, S Studios is our architect. So the home elevations are on the right. It's our typical 4 for those of you that have seen our work kind of in neighborhoods before. That's what it'll look like. So it's a 1,500 square foot 4-bedroom, 2-story home, very similar. But what we uniquely did is in the back is an ADU, and that's what you start to see. But I'm hoping that what you see on those top two is it looks like a house in a garage, and that is very, very intentional. We wanted this to add density to the neighborhood, but do it softly. And so how does it feel like it very much integrates in the neighborhood? Fortunately, the neighborhood there isn't what we call an alley loaded neighborhood, which means you come from the back. And so the ADU that's in the back will actually be attached to the garage. So the garage is there, and then it's a 1-bedroom, 500 square foot house. And Elizabeth, if you want to roll just a little bit on there. So right there, yep, on the floor plate. So the far 3 images there are just the home itself, but the far left one is our ADU, and you can see it has a garage on the right. We put a large kitchen area in there, a lot of storage in there, a bathroom and a bedroom. And so we're super excited to bring this to the market. It will get sold through our normal home ownership piece. But we will also take a little bit of time to let people hopefully get in it, or at least we'll get in and video it so people can see it online. But we really wanted to get a sense of how it functions. How does it work? The neighborhood itself has been very, very supportive. We've been very fortunate there. They were excited to be where this demonstration project would take place. It's a great chance to kind of highlight the work that Invest DSM is doing in the neighborhoods. And if you've been on this we're right at 10007 Euclid, which is also where the traffic calming has taken place. We've got all that great reinvestment stuff that's going up on the 6th Avenue corridor. So we love this location, but we know today that 2/3 of households are 1 to 2 people. And so we're not always building homes that are sized to that. So here was a great chance to do everything that Brad just talked to you about. This can to do a lot of different things. We call it flex across the ages. So it can kind of touch all those boxes that he talked about. But one of the most important things that we're excited about is it also allows multi-generational living. And so we in Des Moines we aren't always as welcoming as we can be. And here's an opportunity to welcome folks that are used to multi-generational living to add that opportunity here. And obviously that can be super flexible. So Elizabeth, can you want to roll this one more slide there just so folks can see? This is just the site plan. The house is to the south or the lower part of the screen, and then the ADU sits to the back. So that just gives you an idea of how it looks, but you can see they're lined up. So as you go up and down Euclid, honestly, if you didn't know we were new construction, you probably couldn't find us. And that's really our intention, is really to kind of blend into the neighborhood. So, part of what they asked me to talk about too is what goes into this. Well, I always encourage people to take some time and think about how you're going to use it. Brad gave you lots of different ways to design it, to build it. It can be over the garage. It can, this one will be 1-story living. It can be in the basement. You're going to hear about that options. There's lots of different ways to do it. So think about what you're going to use it for, but think long term, not just today. How can that be, if you're going to stay in the home, how can that be used over multiple years? But what's your neighborhood look like? What does the lot look like? And Jason will give you some good information about kind of what that means. But think about how that integrates. We knew we had to be super thoughtful when we went into this neighborhood that's alley loaded to tuck that in behind. And so it's typically in the rear yard, but really think about what you want to use it for. But also make sure that you're using professionals. Your architect will be your best friend. Jason, the planning department will be great. The city here has been very, very supportive here. Obviously, they included in their new zoning ordinance. And I'm going to steal a little bit of Jason's thunder and tell you the property tax thing. Jason and the city are going to take care of that because they're so excited about this coming. He has a little surprise for you, so stay tuned for that. So think about all of those things. Be realistic about cost. Financing is a question that we get a lot. People do this very differently. You can do mortgage, you can do homeowner equity loan. Neighborhood Finance is the partner that we have here. They work beautifully in the neighborhoods. They would love to talk to you about that, but be realistic. I mean, cost will start at about $50,000, and in today's cost escalations, they're going up. So be realistic about what you want and kind of how you should use it. And then finally, what I'll recommend, obviously, with Home Inc., we talk a lot about education. And if at some point you would decide to be a landlord here, I really encourage you to get some good education on what that means. I always tell people, everybody needs a lease, even if it's the kids. At some point, there'll be a challenge or a question or an issue. Just give everybody a lease. It's fine. Look for good education. At Home Inc., we offer that. We're happy to do that. I know that they'll provide the website that's in there, but really get some good education about what that means, because being a landlord means you have to be thoughtful about screening, what you do as far as screening tenants, making rules, providing a safe place for folks to live. So get a good education on that. But we're super excited to be a partner of this. This is an amazing opportunity for Des Moines. Brad was just telling us before we went live that AARP is focusing on 4 cities nationally to do a new webinar, and Des Moines is one of those. So that's pretty exciting. Appreciate this. Thanks for the opportunity.
I wanted to, before we go to Jason, I wanted to just note a couple of the questions that came up in the chat. First, Jason, in particular, as you're kind of going through, maybe be sure to mention that, like, what specifically applies to Des Moines, and Brad, maybe if you have any advice for how the other metro area cities are doing ADUs, that might be helpful too. That came from one of our questions. And then one question was about whether or not this needs to actually be hooked up to a sewer system for the bathroom, kitchen, or if it would be possible to do it more like the tiny home where, you have the composting toilet. And if any of you can weigh in on that, that would be great.
I'm going to let Jason answer that one.
Man, those do sound like Jason questions. Thank God we have
Yes.
Jason.
Yes, that's a Jason question.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with everybody today. I mean, AARP and Home Inc. have been tremendous partners in exploring this idea and trying to find ways to bring AHUs or ADUs. In Des Moines, we call them AHUs. To Des Moines as an option. I think Kris did a great job of alluding to thinking about how to fit the character of it and to the neighborhood, to the house, to the primary building, and really that neighborhood character and blending and fitting in so it's kind of tucked away and hidden is the premise and reason for a lot of the kind of different design standards we have with our zoning code that was adopted in 2019. And just, before we get into the particulars, I do think this is a very exciting way to add options, to housing options, give people a housing choice in a manner that really has minimal impact on the character of our neighborhoods that so many people love and cherish in Des Moines. Walkable, urban, tree canopy, historic housing architecture, even infill that Kris's project is a great example of doing new construction that fits in and ties into that character. So we've tried as staff and with our council to be careful and making sure that we are thoughtful in how this applies. Going to those specific questions, just to get those out of the way, make sure I don't forget about them. The sewer question, yes, you would need to hook up to the city sewer system. We have engineering staff that'd be happy to visit with folks as they explore their project. And that's probably a great segue for me to mention that, we're trying to share with you today as much information as possible, but there's only so much time. So I encourage you at any time to reach out to us. If you are an individual that likes to poke around on the website, we have a couple website addresses that you can go and look and see what your property is zoned, find phone numbers to call for different questions that you might have that go beyond zoning, but you will be able to find zoning information there. Those email addresses we'll have up in the chat. It's showmemyhouse.dsm.city. If you are interested in reading code language, we do have a lot of graphics in our new zoning ordinance, so it's not all boring. We have that available at plandsm.dsm.city. But really, sometimes we love the internet, but we're happy to still talk with people. So please give us a call if you have questions, whether it's myself or any of our planners on staff. Happy to visit with you, explain the process, kind of walk you through what you might have to do. Every project will be unique, and so we can't cover everything today, and that's why it's important to know that we're here to visit with you. Every site, every zoning situation is going to be different, so please give us a call, and we can be reached at 283-4192. So that's 283-4192. We'll put that up in the chat. Again, if you just Google City of Des Moines Planning, you should be able to get a hold of us, and we'll make time to visit with you. Some of the design standards or different measures that we have as far as regulation. One of the units, Brad mentioned this in his presentation, but one of the units on the property has to be occupied by the owner. It doesn't matter which unit. There are some size limitations. This is intended to be kind of a secondary unit, so it does, has to be half the size or smaller of the primary unit. If it's separate from the primary house or the main house, there's some general language about architecture, character, having a parking spot. Again, you can find all those details in our zoning ordinance, and we can get into those at a higher level if you want to reach out to us at any time. The exciting thing that Kris mentioned that I want to share with folks is the tax abatement. The city's tax abatement program has been amended, and we do have a 10-year tax abatement program available for these. We're taking the notion of finding missing middle housing and creative housing that fits into our neighborhoods very seriously, and I think that's one of the we can adjust our regulations, but I think also providing tax abatement is a great way to try to promote this and let people know how serious we are about this as an opportunity. Brad, was there anything else that I've missed, or has there been any questions that have popped up in the chat while I've been talking?
No, you did a great job. Thank you, Jason. A couple quick things I want to mention, and Elizabeth shared these materials, but if you're just getting started, this booklet is tremendous to help you figure out kind of design and think through some of the questions you may have about AHUs, ADUs. So this is available at aarp.org/ADU. And you can download it, and I think the library may have copies of it as well. You can also download, this is kind of a newer, this is a newer book, but it also is a great resource. And if you want to order hard copies, you can also do that on the website. One question I had, and I was hoping you and or Kris could address this, because this is the question we get a lot, which is, okay, if I am considering building an ADU, what's the sequencing, right? What are the steps that I need to take, and in what order? Do I make the first call to an architect? Is it to the city? Is it to a construction firm? What would your answer be to that?
I'm guessing that Kris and I might have slightly different responses because of our backgrounds. I mean, for me, I would suggest, what is my property zoned? Is there those kinds of processes that I need, public processes that I need to go through first? And then after that, I would tend to kind of price it out. Is it something that fits my budget? And maybe Kris would do it in the same order, but I know in the development community, they often are looking at, can they make their numbers work? And then they'll check with us on the regulation side. I don't know, Kris, do you have thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think the first call should be to the city, because I think what's important for folks to realize, the city is ideally working for this to be available citywide. It is not available citywide at this point. So definitely call first to verify, because they can tell you, are you zoned? Does it work there? But also give you a little bit of indication of what are the limitations that are going to be depending on my lot. And so you want to start there, because then you start to, A, is it even an option for me? B, what do I have to think about, so those limitations going in. And as Jason alluded to, there is an opportunity if you're not currently zoned to adjust that, and he can walk through that with anybody. So you're going to want to know that, because that's going to indicate timing. And so Jason, you and I are going to agree. Definitely start with the city. But then at that point, that's when you're going to want to talk about a professional, and this is in no way a recommendation to anybody, but I will tell you, Ask Studios is the one that designed the demonstration. Sequel Architecture is another firm that has been doing some work with Invest DSM. And so those are two that have experience. There's lots of architects, lots of professionals that can help you with this. But I know that question's coming. So those are two that I know have experience. And, Jason, obviously, when they call into the city, they can tell you some folks that at least have been through their process.
Great.
And I do want to just put in a plug. Kris is right. It's not a citywide program at this point from a zoning perspective, but we are currently evaluating some code amendments that we intend to take forward this year to kind of work us towards that, with the thought that we are going to continue to monitor this over the next year or two, and then keep making adjustments as we kind of learn how this works in Des Moines.
We did have a question come in from someone. You mentioned that we're not zoned across the city yet. This person lives in unincorporated Polk County. They've been in contact with planning and development manager about building an AHU for father-in-law, and kind of got a hard no about having it as a detached AHU. They require them to be attached to the primary residence, and we don't have great existing conditions at their house to allow them to do that. Do you have any advice for navigating this, or advocating for changes in the code in unincorporated Polk County?
Well, I think that maybe that might be a good question for Brad. I mean, you've worked really closely with the city staff. I don't know if you've had contact with Polk County or some advice on how to advocate. I mean, I have, ideas of, from, how you go about the process of amending code, but I think Brad might be better suited on the advocating side.
Well, and I would certainly be willing to advocate to Polk County to make changes. I mean, I don't think it, frankly, makes a lot of sense in this day and age to have a requirement that it be attached to the home. And, one of the things I'll say about working with the city is I'm really impressed with the speed at which they are making changes. So they revisited their zoning code for the first time in 54 years in 2019. And expanded the use of AHUs. Well, then earlier this year, they looked at it again, and they're considering expanding it again. And so what we're seeing in some communities out there is they are just allowed by right. And so that means they're just allowed in all single dwelling residential lots. And, when it comes to ADU ordinances, I think that is the gold standard. And I've talked to Jason. He knows I've harassed him over the last year about this all the time. And to Jason's credit, he understands, and the city understands. I think what they're doing right now is just taking cautious steps, which actually does make sense, to make sure that they're doing it in a thoughtful way. But when it comes to ADU advocacy, you are talking to the right organization, because we do this, I would say, more than any other organization out there. So shoot me an email, whoever asked that question, and Elizabeth, put my email address in the chat if you can. It is banderson@aarp.org. And I would be happy to have conversations with the county and with staff to make sure that we have an ordinance that makes sense.
Yeah, and I'll just add on it, for a lot of cities, Des Moines is very progressive. They've been right up there after it. A lot of cities, it's just raising awareness. And so, definitely calls in, because I think they just don't know it's something that people are interested in. And so I think what's unique here is that, yes, Brad will do a beautiful job because he advocates fantastic, but also Invest DSM, which again, the organization that's highly involved in the Des Moines one, there is 2 Polk County supervisors on that group. And so I think they would be super interested, because they were great supporters of this they'd, I think, be very interested in the fact that there's people in Polk County that are interested in this opportunity as well. So we'll get after that.
And Elizabeth, do we have another question in there? Because I did want to talk a little bit about financing, because I think that is a question that people tend to ask a lot. And I know Kris has some opinions about that, but is there another question before we get into financing?
Yeah. The last question we got was, does an ADU get its own mailing address?
Yes, that's the short answer to that one.
It does. Okay. Wow, a short answer from the city. I love it. So, Kris, I was thinking, with the house or the financing, it is one of the questions because Wells Fargo doesn't have a tool for this yet, and I think, some of the challenges have been around just assessing an ADU and getting a good assessment on it. So, if you're thinking about this, what are your thoughts here locally on getting financing for this?
Yeah, I think, the challenge has been, and I'll tell you, again, the part of the reason we want to do the demonstration is we wanted to be out first and kind of see some of those bumps in the road that you go through. And the appraisal was absolutely a bump. The first appraisal we got was not workable. And so again, but appraisers aren't seeing them. So how do we educate the appraisers? How do we educate the lenders? Because, financing is certainly an option. Again, we specifically chose neighborhood finance because they work in the neighborhoods. They're used to unique opportunities. I think they're over in Cedar Rapids too. And so, we chose them as that kind of flexible partner, but it will be education, again, asking your lender because they have to be financed very differently. They're not a standalone, that's why they typically get rolled into, a mortgage, again, a second, home equity opportunity. But ask questions about that if you want to do that, because a lot of folks are doing that or doing a refi, but you want to make sure that your lender has a good appraiser that knows what they're appraising.
Good call. And I know we've got someone who lives in an ADU. And Elizabeth, do you want to introduce Katy?
Thank you, Brad. Yes, I want to introduce Katy Severe. She's a local homeowner here in Des Moines, and she actually moved into a home with an ADU. So she's going to tell us more about that. Katy, can you start by telling us about your ADU itself?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me okay. So I knew the people that we bought our house from. So we live in North Beaverdale area by the VA hospital. So I feel comfortable speaking for that family. They actually had this house built. So they bought the lot and then, planned the house with the builder. And at the time, the husband and wife were both kind of finishing up med school. They're physical therapists here in the area. So looking at graduating with a lot of debt. And the wife's mom lived in an apartment by herself. And so they kind of decided to just combine households, to combine incomes to make it more feasible to live there. So then in the planning of building the house, they built an ADU in the basement for her mom to live there. And then that she also was able to help with childcare costs as well. So kind of all those things that were talked about earlier in the program of the benefits of being able to have, a parent live with you. So they were, as their kids got older, they were looking to move closer to where their kids would be going to high school because they were open enrolled into Des Moines. So we knew about the house coming up for sale and had known about the neighborhood and wanted to live there. And eventually at some point, my mom would be in a very similar position. She lives in Oregon currently, and she's semi-retired, but eventually wants to kind of come out here and live with us, maybe part-time to begin with, and then, full-time at some point. So we purchased the house with that eventual plan in mind. But we didn't really have a plan for what we would be doing with the space in the meantime. So currently we are actually renting it out through Airbnb. And so I can talk a little bit more about that too, if people are interested. So.
Great. And before we get into questions from the audience, I'm sure that people will have a lot of them. Can you say if there's any surprises, unexpected issues, benefits that have come up with owning an ADU?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we bought it, I mean, we had the idea in mind that we would be using it for its purpose that it was built for as an ADU at some point. But there were other people who were looking at the house at the time who were not interested in that and needed that space. And having a second kitchen and kind of a separate space in the basement didn't quite make sense for their family. So I think, you know, from a realty standpoint, it's a unique situation that you're going to have to find a unique buyer for. Otherwise, you know, some of these families were thinking about just kind of renovating the basement so that they had that space for their own family. So for us, you know, that was what we wanted to use the place for. The only, I would say, surprise is how much sound carries from our living area upstairs into the ADU downstairs, and vice versa. So I think if you have the ability to, like, you're building it and renovating or, you know, doing some new construction, definitely look into some soundproofing. That would be like the only thing that we wish that would have been done differently. So.
Thank you. Yes, I actually personally lived in an ADU for 5 years in the lower level of a landlord who I didn't know in college. And one of the things she added while we were living there was just soundproofing in the ceiling. So that was a change she made. So I want to thank all of our panelists, and I'm going to spotlight you all now to answer questions from the audience. We did get another question come in over chat, but Jenny, another librarian here, will be giving the audience an opportunity at this point to go ahead and turn on their mics, their videos, if they want to ask a question. And feel free to ask specifically to one of our panelists or just a general question. The question we had come in was, let's say you build an ADU and you don't have a use for it. Let's say an aging parent doesn't want to live there anymore. You don't have someone specific to live there. Do you have to become a landlord and use it? What are the things you should think about if you're going to turn it back into just living space with the extra kitchen and bathroom?
Well, I'll hop in. There's no requirement, and Jason's not going to force you to rent it. I think it's thinking uniquely about its uses. We certainly talked about all the opportunities, but in today's era of work from home, for anybody that tried to spend work from home at the kitchen table, especially when the kids were home, this can be an office. This can be a work from home spot. Think creatively about the uses. That's the great thing about an ADU. It can change what it is over time. So maybe you don't want to rent it out for this time, but you're going to be, fully work from home or partially days. It's a great space to use for that. So I think there's lots of other options that it can be used for, even if you choose not to rent it for at this point.
Yeah, and I want to add something. Those are great points, Kris, and something that Katy said, which is about resale. And we've got a house with a really impressive ADU right next door to where I live right now, and it has sold a couple times since we've lived there, and it's never even been put on the market. It always sells by word of mouth, and so I do think. When you're thinking about that, you will, if you give enough lead time, you will find someone who is looking for that ADU and that situation. And depending on what their current situation is, just, spread the word that you're thinking about selling, and you probably won't even have to put it on the market.
Right. And if I can pop in real quick, I think there's two ideas of renting that most people think of. There's like a long-term rental where you're trying to find a tenant, someone who might live there for 6 months to a year, and you really want to vet that person and who's going to be living there. But there's also short-term rental, which is what we're doing currently with our ADU by renting it through the platform of Airbnb. And I will say that has gone so much smoother than I have ever thought that being like a landlord in that sense would be, because that platform kind of takes care of the background checks and they have some coverage for, taking care of accidents and, things that damage that might happen. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be like someone who's going to be living there for a long time. You can look at some of those more short-term rental types too.
And Jason, do you want to weigh in real quick on the permitting? That's a very good point. And there is a permit you need, correct, to do a long-term rental?
Yeah, I'm glad that came up, because it is important to keep in mind that if you are going to do that longer rental, that 30 days plus, so whether it's 6 months or month by month lease, and the individual is not your parent, grandparent, or child or grandchild, then you do need a rental certificate. That's an annual certificate. Our neighborhood inspection division runs that program. And, it's there to make sure that rental housing throughout the city is at a certain standard, but that is something to please keep in mind. And there's more information available about that program on the city's website if you have questions about that process.
One question that came in is, can an ADU be rented to a small business?
The quick answer is probably no. There is always the small chance that there might be a unique situation where a residential use, a house and an ADU are actually on a lot that's zoned for commercial use, where it's commercially zoned. Maybe it's on one of our major corridors, and in a very unique case like that, where the zoning would allow it, it's potential. Now, the building code requirements for commercial use are also different. So there could be some limited opportunities for that to occur, but I would say 99% of the time, the answer would be no.
We did have a question from someone about making their ADU or their primary home accessible. So having an older parent move in, what kinds of changes can you make to your home to make the stairs more easy, the bathrooms, I suppose, any kinds of changes, and how people should go about looking into those things?
Yeah, one of the things, that makes these so attractive is a lot of times folks are, again, they love their neighborhood. They love that. They just want to stay, but they now need accessible. And certainly there's an opportunity to go in and do some rehab work on the house occasionally. But a lot of folks, they're in that little, 3-bedroom, 2-story that they've been in forever. And suddenly those multiple floors don't work. And so that's the nice thing about transferring out to the ADU, assuming that you've put it, on one level. And so that's what a lot of people have used them for. So certainly there's always rehab opportunities in the home. But as you think of that, and again, that's why I'm saying, think about it when you design it today. You may not think that accessible is necessary, but there may be that opportunity. And so when we looked at ours, the one that we're doing as a demonstration, we did put it all on one level. But you're going to want to think about those accessible features as you put it together. So it's a nice way to ensure that it allows that to kind of flex across the ages. And I think, you can weigh in if I'm wrong, Brad, but that's one of the things I'm sure that AARP is starting to see is it's a way to provide accessibility when the cost to do the home itself, and it may just not be even an option for folks, but you're going to still stay in the neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's why we're seeing more of those garage conversions as opposed to above the garage for accessibility issues. One other thing I'd add to that, Kris, is AARP does have a home fit program. It's called Home Fit. And it is a booklet similar to the ABCs of ADUs. And what that provides is a lot of material on how to make your home as age-friendly as possible. Simple things like levers as opposed to doors with round handles, and where to put the microwave. And so it's a great resource and it'd be great to build this on the front end as opposed to having to retroactively home fit your house on the back end. So you can download that from our website as well. It's a home fit guide.
Great. We will be sure to, if we don't get it into the chat before the end of the hour here, we will be sure to share that as well in our follow-up that we send out with our survey. We did get another question. I just want to let all participants know, again, thank you for coming and making this program successful. if you have to duck out before, the end of the hour here, we're getting up close to 1 o'clock. We will send that email out, and do feel free to jump on if you have questions. I don't know if all of our panelists will be able to stay longer than 1 o'clock, but I'll stick around for a few minutes. We did get another question from a participant. What components make a kitchen so that it can actually be called a kitchen? What items does it need to have?
That's a great question. I think you need to have a sink, obviously, and my fuzzy recollection. I don't hold me to this. We need to go double check it, but I think that you also have the sink, but you have a mechanism for cooking. I believe those are two components. I'm happy to look into that further if that individual would like to reach out to me or put them in touch with our building code folks.
That's a great question. I was waiting for the answer.
We did get a message from one of our participants. They have an ADU, and they said that they're going to be installing a chair lift to be able to get up the stairs in their ADU. So even if you have stairs, be aware there are such things as chair lifts that people can sit in and go up. And it's, I think under $5,000 to put one of those in. There's an organization, if you don't have financing for something like that or access to financing, it's called Able Up. I'll put that in the chat here or in the follow-up resources as well. Able Up Iowa, that can provide some assistance with financing some accessibility features in your home. I'll give anybody in the audience a chance here to say hello or make a comment before we close out. I want to give everybody a final chance. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We had fun putting this together. Do check out that AARP Iowa website. They've got lots of great resources on there. Reach out to the city and talk to a human. Get some one-on-one advice on how to get started with this. And thank you again, everybody. We'll be in touch. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll see you.